What is up, podcast land? Welcome to finally another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kubler. And before I introduce somebody, you probably, if you follow my podcast, you're going to recognize Gary Byrne from episode 23, I think it was back in April of 2019. Before I introduce him, I want to first say thank you for being patient with me. It's been probably 4 or 5 months since I've done an actual podcast. And there's a reason for it. It's not like I just decided or got the shits of podcasting. I was, when COVID hit, I was doing a lot of things for the COVID. I was doing a lot of lives on social media. I was doing a ton of video stuff. And I didn't want to overload my brain with trying to balance too many different video things. And I felt at that moment, COVID was the thing I needed to focus on. Then my business shut down, permanently max out due to the tyrannical rule of Governor Tom Wolf in Pennsylvania and his Department of Health director, Rachel Levine. They pretty much have shut down our state, and it's still pretty much shut down. So I owned a gym business, and that pretty much got axed permanently. And when that happened, I decided at the last minute to run for public office, the state legislature in the 146th district, and as a write-in. Did very well in the primary, was working hard to try to get the Republican candidate to step down. He wasn't a very strong candidate, in my opinion, to go head-to-head in a heavily Democratic district. So I chose to try to get him to step down. When that didn't work, I acquiesced and threw my support to the Republican candidate. And so yeah, I was busy doing a lot of things. And I didn't have the bandwidth in my brain to do these interviews. But now I'm back. I got a brand new computer system, so I'm excited to see how this all works out. And without further ado, my man Gary Byrne, how are you, buddy?
Good. How are you?
I've been busy.
Thank you for having me on again. And I wanted to say, publicly, I'm sorry to hear about your gym. I was following it when it was taking place, and if anybody out there, and I know you understand this, Matt, but if anybody out there wants to understand what socialism/communism is, go to Matt's gym. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yep. And it's
about a business. So anyway.
And I'm one of many, small mom and pop shops.
Thousands. So.
And I'm sure we're going to discuss plenty of things.
Yeah.
Give a little context. So Gary and I worked together for many years. And we've been friends for over 20 years when we were both federal air marshals. I left after a little over 4 years. Gary stayed on, retired there. Now I was living in the lap of luxury as a retired federal agent. But many of you may also, if you remember the previous episode, if not, you may have seen him on Fox News. Gary's a New York Times bestselling author. He wrote 2 books that are just amazing. First one's Crisis of Character, which is his accounts of working outside the Oval Office during the Clinton administration and things that he saw and witnessed at the hands of the Clinton administration and Bill and Hillary Clinton and their minions. And when he was a Secret Service uniformed officer working the door at the Oval Office. And the second book is Secrets of the Secret Service, which was a nice little segue from talking about what you did as an agent and then discussing the history and how the Secret Service came to what it is. And both books are amazing. Both can be ordered online.
Thank you.
Gary's website.
Thank you.
So last time you were on, we spent a lot of time talking about what it was like working the door at the Oval Office and a lot of the things you witnessed.
Right.
I think today, well, first of all, I haven't done this in so long. I'm out of practice. I'm going to ask the question that I ask everybody, and I've already asked you this once before, and I'm going to go back and watch your answer from the first one to see if you give the same answer or not. But who is Gary Byrne?
Yeah, so Gary Byrne is a guy who is from Ridley Park, Pennsylvania. Education and learning was not my forte. I had a lot of issues in school with ADD and dyslexia. I was born in 1962. My issues, they didn't really understand what they were at the time. And the bottom line is, to make a long story short, I realized that if I wasn't careful, I could be put into a box that that said that I didn't function correctly, and I knew that wasn't true. It's just like if you know the way I describe my issues with ADD and dyslexia are, you know, just imagine being a sprinter and you only have 7 toes. You know, you learn to develop, you learn to work around these things, and you go on your strong points. And I learned when one of the best things I ever did was I went in the U.S. Air Force, and the U.S. Air Force, like all the military branches, has a unique way of learning. They tell you, they show you, they do it for you, and then they let you fail at it until you get proficient at it. And baby, I'm telling you, I took off like an F-15, and it just sung to me. And I got this great job in the Air Force and the security police. I went on to Boeing aircraft for a couple of years when I got out of the Air Force. I met this really nice girl at a nightclub one night, and we've been married over 31 years, I think it is. And we
might not be the right number.
Listen, that won't be the first time I fell in that grenade. But anyway, we have 2 great kids that are home right now. One doing his senior year in high school, and one doing their senior year at a university. And so I am somebody who believes that my mission in life is to protect others. I can't define it better than that. I've always had that, I'm kind of stealing a line out of a movie, but I always had that protective instinct, and which is a real thing. But I've always felt like, it's not that I felt like I was expendable, but I always felt like there were people out there for a lot of reasons. I was raised under the old-fashioned rules of you protect your family. Women that you are close to, you protect them, not because they're weak, but because you have skills they don't, and vice versa. My wife balances the checkbook.
Same.
I repel threats. That's what I do. I'm the intimidator. I'm not a bully, but I'm a bully when I need to be. And that's another one of my gifts, Matt, is I can go from, and you know this as well as anybody, not only do we work together, but we train together a lot. And you know that I can go from this demeanor to the biggest, that there is. And keep that control and reel it back in when the threat is, and that's my gift. And so that's who I am. As far as the books go, I never, like I told you before, I never ever thought I would talk about these things. But when I left the Secret Service, I went to the Air Marshals. I wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid anymore. And what I mean by that is when I was in the Secret Service, I was all about it. It's like a lot of law enforcement, like a lot of careers. It's all encompassing. You're always thinking about it. It's very critical. And the Secret Service and the Air Marshals and the military is like this. And this, Matt, law enforcement is like this too. Everything is an emergency. And the emergency starts up here and it comes down to you and me. Everything is urgent. It's all got to be done yesterday. It's always critical. You don't understand the big picture. And so later on, I decided that the world needed to know what really happened with, why I was the first person in the history of the Secret Service who had to testify against the President of the United States. My case went all the way to the Supreme Court. You know that. Mm-hmm. I didn't want anything to do with it, but I went along with it because that's what the law was. I followed the law. I supported the Constitution. It wasn't about Bill Clinton, the person. It was about the office of the presidency. That's who the oath is to, and it's to the constitutional republic. That's who the oath is also to. I didn't want to talk about any of that, but years later, after I was forced to, again, I wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid, and when I was there, I was drinking it, stirring it, handing it out. I loved that job, but time went on, and I thought it was time to tell my side of the story. My freedom of speech is no different than anybody else's. So, and today, who I am is this retired guy that helps people whenever I can. I help people that are running for Republican offices, conservatives. During the campaign, as you know, President Trump read twice from my first book during the campaign, which was pretty funny. But anyway, but it doesn't mean that I am only about conservatism and being a Republican. I'm about being a human. And I realize that there's a lot of things that listen, I had nobody, the idea that anybody has any unfair advantage about because of the way they look. And we're probably going to get to this anyway, so I'll go ahead and throw this grenade first. It's not about skin color. It's about behavior. It's not about skin color, sex, where you're from, your religion. It's not about that. It's about behavior. I don't care who you are. If you behave well, so be it. You're a good person. If you don't blame the consequences on other people. So that's who I am.
I love it. Well, two things, well, many things we're going to talk about, but one of the things you pointed out that with your wife, she balances the checkbook and you protect people. My wife and I, and this is no shit, I need clear, in many things in my life, I need clarity.
Yes.
And I need to know that I'm communicating clearly and that we're hearing one another, because without communication, we're all screwed. So early on, when I was dating my wife, I said, listen, when we get married, we got to have areas of responsibility. I said, I can't be held responsible for something that we collectively do if it's not done.
Right.
I said, example, if the grass needs to be cut and we both have mowed the grass before and the grass doesn't get cut, who's to blame that it didn't get cut? So we have to, I always say, without blame, there's no reconciliation. I don't care what anybody says. So we created the areas of responsibility. She has her areas that she takes care of. So if, dinner's not made, I'm like, yo, what the hell, where's dinner?
Yeah.
Conversely, if the car needs the oil change and it's not done, and she's told me 10 times, my ass is on fire, right? So she's up my ass for it. So I totally, and she does balance the checkbook too. I don't. So I do think that in that regards, outside of the many other things we have in common, we have that in common.
Right.
Secondly, the protective gene is a very real thing.
Yeah.
I was just off air, and I won't get too deep in it because I don't want to get myself in any more trouble. But politically, I had some heat put on me at my work.
Right.
And when they couldn't come after me personally, they spread the net a little wider and went after others in my department. And my protective gene kicked in because I don't, my politics, and when I was running for state office, shouldn't impact anyone else's life that didn't have anything to do with it. And that was happening. So as a protective measure, I canceled my Facebook because that's what they were coming after me for. They wanted to take away my platform and my voice. So I had to deactivate my Facebook. And lo and behold, the minute I did that, all the heat disappeared. So that protective gene is real, and wanting to make sure that people around you that you feel responsible for are safe is something that we have inside of us that not many people have. That's not a inherent trait for many people. Some people will do it when forced, but it's not necessarily inside them all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's, when people talk about the wolves and the sheep, and then the one that's going to go after and protect the sheep from the wolves, that's us.
Yes.
People that play that role. And when, the wolves coming after the flock, they step back and don't do anything.
Right.
There's others that are willing to step in and actually take on the wolf.
They lean in. They absolutely do. And it's, listen, there's tens of thousands of examples, millions of examples out there of, our brave brothers and sisters in law enforcement, general human beings, and especially in the military. And there is that, it's not that you don't have that fear. For example, we were both air marshals, and this is a little uncomfortable for some people to hear, but our job was to sit on a plane and wait for somebody to try to cut our heads off.
Yep.
And it's not that I think I can defeat 100 people. It's that I think I have a better chance than most to do it, or 17 people, or 14, or 3, or 5, or whatever the scenario was. And it's not that I think I'm expendable. It's that I think I'm good enough to do it, and I think I can do it. And it's not that I'm not afraid, because the biggest oh crap or the biggest scream you're going to hear when things start to come apart is going to be mine, as my head is spinning up and my instincts are taking over, and I'm leaning forward and doing the right thing. And I'm not trying to paint a picture of myself that makes me look. I'm just telling you the way we function. This isn't the way I function. This is the way a lot of us function, and you're one of them. And we work with many others. And the point you sort of made, but you're being polite, is the ones that aren't like that. This is Gary Byrne talking. Classify them as paycheck grabbers. They stuck out like, an appendage on a goldfish, and So, but kudos to everybody who does do it, and both men and women, and we're always going to need them. But you just have to, like I was telling you before, you just have to understand that when you are that person that steps up, you're a lightning rod. If you get in the way of the establishment, and especially, and my experiences with the negative side of the Democratic Party. Don't forget one of the first tricks they tried to pull when the Monica Lewinsky story leaked out was they tried to say she was having an affair with me or another uniform division officer that worked there at the time.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's never their fault. They never do. They will destroy anybody to keep their narrative going. So anyway,
it's many things I'm going to talk about that we just had here, but for people to give context, I think one of the things that people don't get is as air marshals, that's kind of like it's the forgotten about law enforcement agency in the federal government, right? It's got some mystique to it, but people don't really understand what it is. We're not the TSA, we're not the guys at the screeners.
Mm-hmm.
We may work. Well, I don't anymore, but we may have worked originally under the FAA and then the TSA when Homeland was created, but we weren't the TSA. We were pretty much our own entity. But when training, and you mentioned it, whether it's 100 people or 14 or 17 or 5, people don't understand when we would train with simunitions, and simunitions are fired like a bullet. They look like a bullet, except they have a plastic tip with, soap, colored soap or food coloring or whatever's in it. They're coming out at like 300 feet, massively fast, and they would stick into your skin because we were shooting, it's a plane. It's, we have a mock-up plane that would simulate an aircraft, and we had the seats, and we would have dummies in the seats, and we'd also have our teammates wearing hoods and helmets and eye protection and playing roles. And we would sometimes have 10 terrorists in a scenario and doing all kinds of different things. Right. And we would have to, two, 3 guys would be up there doing their job, doing their business and taking care of things and learning how to handle that chaos. They blow in smoke and blow in music and strobe lights, and we had all kinds of stuff to really screw with our ability to communicate. And that's, I go back to the communication part with one another, and then with getting compliance with the people on the plane, and then taking care of business that we had to take care of. It was the training in and of itself was stressful beyond belief, because you're training within your team, and your team is looking at one another to see who's the best on the team, who do I trust the most, who's going to take care of business the best. If we're working together that day and all hell breaks loose on a 757 flying across country, what do we do?
Right.
And we have about 5 minutes before an F-16 is putting a missile up our ass.
No, right.
We got to get shit squared away.
That's the other thing.
Right.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Not to take anything away from the fact that it's really bad on the plane, but if we don't get it taken care of fast enough, there's going to be a missile shot at us, because they're not flying planes into buildings anymore. It's never going to happen.
The days of waiting are over. They're not going to take that chance. It's just like with school shootings. The days of waiting for the SWAT team was a huge mistake. The first 2 or 3 guys there make the communications. They tap each other on the shoulder. They move forward. And they move forward like they're your kids, because they are. And that's the mentality. And so one of the things that I always, and it's good, and I know you're pretty good at this too. It's always good. You have to find humor, no matter how dark it is. You have to find humor in it. And whenever we discuss these things, I remember one particular day in training. And I won't tell the whole story, but the end of the scenario was, and this is when we were just gotten to, we were still in Mays Landing, and we had the basically wooden mock-up that what was those guys' names? Tim, the 2 Tims, and Burke built for us. And, they built it out of wood in Home Depot on a shoestring budget, but they did a great job. Anyway, the end of the scenario is there's 12 bad guys laying in the aisle. Myself, and I'll use first names, you'll know who they are. Myself, Freddie, and Jim, who looked like me.
Yep.
And I'm lying on top of somebody and I'm shooting past Freddie's head, hitting what is, supposedly the last terrorist. And when we were all done, he goes, I thought you were shooting at me. And I said, I was. I just happened to hit the right guy, and he was offended at first until he realized, hey, it worked. And no matter what the chaos is, and it's one of those jobs, like in any law enforcement job, is you have to realize, the problem with the public perception of law enforcement today is their first introduction to law enforcement is usually through TV and movies, which is not realistic. I don't care how realistic it is, it's not. Because you cannot, in a half hour to an hour show, or even a 3-hour movie, you cannot put in everything that's going on in a human being's head, both from the law enforcement side and from the suspect side. And that is significant. And look, it's easy, now's a kind of a bad time for law enforcement, but from my perspective, it's always has been, because one of the, and you can't forget this, one of the biggest problems when I was in the Secret Service Uniform Division, when I was an airman in the Air Force, and even as an air marshal, the organization that we worked for spent more time coming after us than they did going after the bad guys. They were so much retribution and so hostile towards some of their employees who they perceived as not just like them. And I mean, look at the, anyway, I don't want to get into all the, all that right now until you're ready. But my point is the perception of law enforcement is not real. It's if your perception of law enforcement, if you're hostile towards law enforcement because something you've read, seen, or came out of that magic TV box from a news agency, and that made you hostile towards law enforcement, then you literally believe in the Easter Bunny, or you could. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what reality is.
When you're easily manipulated, that's the thing.
Yeah,
that's easily susceptible to manipulation. Then
if you believe that, you believe when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon, if you believe he did, it was made of cheese. I'm just telling you, that's how drastic it is. And I've seen it from both sides. Don't get me wrong. I'm not one of those people who always says, law enforcement's always right. No, but what we are is we're always trying to do the right thing. What we also are is human. There's a reason there's malpractice in the medical industry, because they're human, they make mistakes. There's a reason your accountant makes mistakes. Everybody, you name the job, even how many times have you gone out to pick up the garbage can and there's garbage on the street that fell out of the truck and they didn't pick it up? The difference is it doesn't cost somebody's life usually. Or somebody doesn't run out there and say, oh, they did it because they don't like a certain person. And again, I'll wrap this up real quick, Matt. I'm just trying to make the point that law enforcement has always been a magnet and a lightning rod for hostilities from their management and from parts of society. The Democratic Party is using them as an anvil to drive this false narrative that we are the enemy, and we're not. Anybody that believes they are, I want you to remember what happened on 9/11, 2001. And I want you to remember all those cops and firemen too, but we're talking about law enforcement, ran into those buildings so fast they didn't even wait for radio transmissions. That's who we really are. We're the same guys that pull over on the side of the road when you're broken down at night and you're about to wet your pants because the AAA guy hasn't gotten there. And all of a sudden you look in your rearview mirror and you see those lights and you're like, first you're scared, oh, police. And then you realize he gets out of the car, he walks up to you, he says, ma'am, sir, are you okay? Step away from the car because it's dangerous to be by the roadside. That's who we are. This other narrative is, I'm not saying it's completely false. There's a small percentage of bad people who get in law enforcement or people who make mistakes. You've got to allow for the mistakes. If you allow for it and everything else, you have to understand what the left is trying to do. They're trying to drive a narrative that we're the problem, and we're not.
I totally agree. I did a TED Talk, TEDx Talk audition. I made it to a final. I had to do a live audition. It took 25. I was 28th. was very proud of what I did, and was under the
Good.
of chaos
Nice
in
work.
Asbury Park, New Jersey. And it was a 5-minute audition, and I did the theme was chaos, and I did mine about the chaos that goes on inside of a police officer's mind when they're put into a chaotic environment, and how we have to settle that noise down and be focused, laser-like focused, and handle the problem. And I laid out pretty much how, as a police officer, you get up to probably 18 months of training, 6 months in the academy, maybe a year of field training, and then you're sent out into the world to be perfect and to answer every call, whether you know anything about what just happened or not, with the information provided by dispatch and maybe some previous encounters with that person, and you're relying on your training and experience and life experience. And some people have more of that, and some people have less of that. And when you dial 911, you don't get to choose whether you get the 30-year veteran cop or the 18-month just out of training cop. You don't get to pick that person. The dispatch gets to whatever officer is on duty at that moment in that area, and that's who comes. But it doesn't change the perception from the person calling 911 that they want it done perfectly. They want their problem handled now. They want everything done to their satisfaction. And as a police officer, we have to do our best to provide that. Now, if you get thrown into a call where there's, the shit's hitting the fan and there's a life or death situation and you potentially have to use lethal force, everybody needs to understand that inside each and every person ever made is the fight or flight instinct. It's the only job in the world outside of the military, law enforcement, where you have to ignore flight. Even though it's raging inside of you, you want to leave, you're scared, you don't want to do it. But your job and your responsibility says you must. So you must ignore the thing that's screaming inside of you and go handle a problem under that level of duress inside your own central nervous system. That's inside of you at the entire time. That fear, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here. I don't want to have to make this decision. But the minute you're forced into that situation, because you didn't pick it, you were asked to go.
Right.
You didn't choose to show up in a shit show. You were told by your dispatcher to respond. And then you're asked on a moment's notice to deduce everything that's going on, as I say, unfuck it, and try to figure out how to put it all back together again without causing any more damage.
Right.
Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes you have to end the problem. And a friend of mine asked me to come speak to her children, all middle high school age kids, about what's going on in our world with the BLM stuff, with the different shootings that have happened recently. And I explained to them the one where the guy got shot 7 times in the back in I guess, where was that, Wisconsin or wherever it was? No, it was in Michigan, I guess. But when I explained to them how, as a police officer, and right, wrong, or indifferent, that's not what this is about. I explained to them how the police officers who showed up, the process they go through, and how their toolbox is this big when they show up, and they have all these different things at their disposal. But as things progress, the toolbox gets smaller. Things you can use at your disposal to handle the situation are no longer relevant. And at sometimes you're left with one tool, and that's lethal force. And sometimes you have to use it, even when it doesn't appear that it's necessary to the outside looking in. But in that case, it was. And in many of these cases, it was. Michael Brown in St. Louis, in Ferguson, turned out he was getting his ass kicked. The officer was, and Michael Brown went for his gun. It wasn't hands up, don't shoot. But we made the determination immediately as a society that the cop was wrong, that he had his hands up because the media narrative said so.
Right.
Then you find out Breonna Taylor, for 6 months, it was the wrong apartment. She was a dispatcher, all these false narratives, when it turns out that she was actually the subject of an investigation and her name was on the search warrant and they were in the right place. Yes. So all these things, and I don't want to get too deep into the Black Lives Matter stuff and all that, because that can go off the rails quickly. But as a police officer, what I want people to hear is that we don't go into it going, I hate this person, I'm not going to do my job, I'm going to make this worse, and I'm going to do something completely that is going to screw my life up forever and ruin me and ruin someone else's life intentionally. That's not how it works.
Right.
Okay? I'm thrust into an environment that I didn't create, and I now have to come in and unfuck it. And I try to do it the best that I can with the tools that I have in my repertoire of experience and life experience. And if I don't have all that, I'm going off of sheer reactionary fear.
Right.
And it's not prejudice, and it's not racism, and it's not hate. It's 99.9% of the time, the only emotion that's going through a police officer's mind when he's pulling back on that trigger about ready to take somebody's life is fear.
Yeah.
And we're human, and we make mistakes, and sometimes the choice isn't right, but sometimes that's no longer acceptable.
Right. So I agree with everything you said, and clearly a lot of our experiences were very similar. I had less exposure to normal police work than you did. And when I say normal police work, I mean a patrolman.
Right.
One of the most, and you said this, but I'm going to clarify it a little bit better. One of the things you were saying is that, and actually I'm going to actually go back to what I said first, was people's first impressions or information about law enforcement is from TV and movies. It's not real. Two, what you're describing is that you show up on a scene and that person is having, and you can take any one of those people you just mentioned. I'll say Michael Brown. Michael Brown was having the worst day of his life. He was about to. And what a lot of people leave out, I'll just use Michael Brown as an example, that they leave out is, I'm going to change the scenario for a minute. You're called or you're at the shopping mall and you're just being mad at the shopping mall. You come outside, and out on the road, on the 4-lane road with a yellow divider line, there's a man walking down the road, weaving in and out from one side to the other through traffic. And there's police officers standing there and they do nothing and they let him go. That's negligence on the police officers. Michael Brown was doing exactly that. That's what drew the law enforcement's attention to him. They didn't scoop Michael Brown up in the library. He wasn't in church and he wasn't in an orphanage. He was weaving down the road, physically walking down the road, endangering his own life and obstructing traffic. And it's dangerous to the public. And you can stop the scenario there. And then everything else that happened is also Michael Brown's responsibility. You cannot take the responsibility. Listen, I understand some of these people we deal with are mentally ill. Nobody understands that more than I do. The Secret Service, the White House is a magnet for the unstable. Good Lord, they come from all over the world. But that does not, it does not take away their responsibility for their actions or their responsibility of their families or some of the system. You can't blame everything. If a guy walks up, and this happened, if a woman walked up to, and this has happened, a woman walks up to the northwest gate at the White House and says, I want to see George Bush. And she's disheveled looking, and we recognize her sort of because she's homeless. And they said, no. She said, well, fine. And she walks out of the booth, out into the street on Pennsylvania Avenue. There's 50 business people waiting to come in. And she pulls out a razor blade. She pulls her sleeves up and she starts gouging herself. And what do my coworkers do inside? They hit the button saying we have a person trying to commit suicide outside the gate. They grab the fire blanket and then they tackle this woman with the razor blade. They didn't tell her to stop. They didn't try to, because it's not time to do that. There is no social, the time for social, what's the word I'm looking for?
Social worker.
Social worker is not then. The
Right.
time for social worker was 2 months before, was 2 hours later, not then. Now you need that guy or that woman who will run into the danger, who will think. Think about that. In less than 3 seconds, the guy went from the computer, entering people, grabbed the fire blanket, which was for something else, but because of his experience, he ran out there and he tackled her and he stopped her from killing herself. And the first thing they did was they flipped her over. He turned around. His coworkers were there with the medical kit, called a fat kit at the time, first aid and trauma. They put bandages, basically tourniquets on her elbows to stop the bleeding, and they saved her life. Now, here's the thing to the story. That's not the first time she did it. She did it a couple of years before. And what's my point? Is there's other parts of society, and that person's bad decision, it's mental illness. What happened was they go and they get the help. They get free help from St. Elizabeth's. They get them on meds. They get them acting close to normal as possible. And then eventually they make the decision to go off their meds and they start this vicious cycle. You cannot blame that on law enforcement. You can't.
But they'll try. And that's the sad part, is that there's
No,
always going to be that.
But because the perspective, even the people that manages sometimes, who literally have worked their way up from where we all are to where they are now, they act like they don't know what the facts are. And the facts are, you can't judge the police officer for 3 seconds of decision making under the biggest stresses ever that you don't even understand how to function under. And here's, I'll wrap this up real quick. Anybody that doubts what I'm saying, go online and read. They did a thing down in Georgia a while back where some local, I give them credit, some local leaders from the Black community and some local politicians took a Georgia Police Department. I can't remember if it was Atlanta. They took them up on an offer, and they went through. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, they went through a couple of days of training. They gave them the same training that we got, and then they put them through a scenario. And when they were done, one of the men was in tears. He had no idea. Again, his only perception is the negative perception of years and years of hearing law enforcement hates us because of our skin color, or this is what I saw on TV. I saw colors. I know what real law enforcement is. Hey, I saw such and such movie. I understand. That's not what reality is. And if you think that Matt and I or any other cop or soldier or airman, male or female, is any different, we're off the same shelf that you are. We just had different training, and our personalities and our genetics give us predisposition to certain protection things. But we're just like you are. We are. And to judge us for that 3 seconds and then blame us for a history of bad behavior, every one of these people that have been involved in these horrendous incidences, again, they didn't find them in the library. They were not at church or the synagogue or whatever. They were continuously doing criminal activity. Poor Brianna got caught in the crossfire of a man that she was with, whatever the relationship was shooting at the police. And the police defended themselves. And one of the cops was hit. That is what the facts are. You can say whatever else you want about her. Her family can go and say what their hopes were for, but they were not having that conversation when she was living that life. So
and that comes down to, everything is about, for me and you, and because we live in a very pragmatic, we live in a gray world, but when you're uncovering the gray to get to the black and white in a figurative sense, not in a color, when you're trying to figure out what's fact and what's fiction, you start in the gray and you have to get to one side or the other. You can't remain in gray when you're trying to solve a crime, when you're trying to handle a situation. There's always, you've got to uncover the gray for what it is.
Right.
And facts matter.
Yes.
That's ultimately what we live off of. And ultimately, the facts usually derive from someone else's poor choice. I didn't do any of the things that, the reason why I was called to your house or to your business or whatever, wasn't part of that. All the things that happened, I didn't create, I wasn't involved in, but when I am called to come there and handle your problem, I have to take the gray away and find out what actually happened. And that's the job of a law enforcement officer, whether it's in serving a search warrant, they're trying to figure out whether or not there was a criminal enterprise happening as far as a stash house for money and drugs at her house. That's why they were there. It wasn't because two black people were living in an apartment and they decided to go raid a black person's house. It was, they were part of a criminal enterprise and there was a reason why they were there, and a judge agreed and said, let's do a search warrant. Now we can talk about whether or not 3 a.m. search warrants are good practice or not. I think it's asinine. I think that led and contributed to a lot of the problem was the time frame of which the search warrant happened. In Pennsylvania, there's no nighttime search warrants. Well,
you have to, yeah, but I mean, to be, I'm not going to use the term be fair, but to have all the information, we should discuss where that comes from. And it comes from a study years ago. It was actually done by the military, and I know you're familiar with it, is that, one of the best times to stage an attack is early in the morning because of the REM cycle of most people. And
right.
So that's the reason that they stage these late night attacks. And it's easy, or not attacks, but search warrants, excuse me. And it's easy.
Military attacks.
Yeah, it's yeah. these search warrants, and it's easy to criticize. Again, it's easy to criticize the police for a search warrant when it goes bad. What you don't, and listen, I'm not immune to this. I worked with a Secret Service Uniform Division officer who was on a trip one time and got this phone call from his wife. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, and then she dropped dead from a heart attack. Now, she was revived. What happened is the local Maryland Police Department was executing a search warrant, and they were in such a hurry because they were trying to get this done before, because they also knew that the DEA was looking at these people. They wanted to get there first. And there was a mistake made on the warrant. And they flipped them. Not only did they flip the numbers on the house map, but they, I forget the name of the street, but instead of being Mueller, they went to Miller.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just coincidentally that the residence of this house was this Uniform Division officer that I worked with, who'd been in the Secret Service for probably 15 years at the time. And they executed a very hostile, the warrant was for drugs, paraphernalia, firearms. It doesn't get more speed, surprise, violence of action. They knocked the door down. They pulled the kids out of bed. The wife, she had actually had a heart attack and ended up having a lifelong, heart malfunction because of what happened. And I don't say this, I don't say this with humor, but my point is I'm not, like I said, I understand we're human and we make mistakes, and that's an example of a mistake. Now, the police department, they had no leg to stand on. And they did what police departments try to do a lot of times, is protect their own. But because of who the victims were in this, the innocent family, they had to come clean. And the Secret Service, it went to court, and that's a different subject. But they that's just an example. And just, again, it doesn't matter when we talk about these things. And I say this to some of our friends in law enforcement, and I say it to people when I'm giving speeches. You take out what the people look like. Again, it doesn't matter what they look like. It's just that it's their behavior. The same crime that somebody does, it doesn't matter what there's, if you're somebody selling drugs, heroin with fentanyl or whatever, and people are dying from your distribution, the law is blind. They don't care what your gender is, what your sex is, what your chosen gender is. They don't care what skin tone or how much melatonin or skin color you have. They don't care if you stand when you go to the bathroom or you sit. They don't care where you're from. They don't care what country you're from. The law wants you to stop because you're destroying our society. Now, I made it sound simple. It gets a little bit more complicated because humans are involved. But if you want those laws enforced, listen, if you don't want Matt and our coworkers to enforce pot laws, then change the law. You're going to open a whole nother can of worms, but whatever. If you want that society, you don't get that society from starting at the enforcement end. You start at the legislative end. And these same politicians that are jumping up and down about bad law enforcement, they've either written these laws or let them remain on the books. And what they say in public is not the way they act behind closed doors. Don't forget, I'm a subject matter expert on that. So anyway, I'll stop there, Matt. And let you.
I totally agree. And the realities of all the problems we're having in our country at the moment start at the top. And it's no different than, and I'll give you a funny story. So when I was in Air Marshal Basic, I had to go to Artesia because I wasn't a prior Fed. So I did my training out in Artesia. So before we left, we did our 3 or 4 days in Atlantic City, and then we went to Artesia, New Mexico for training. We did the guy from the bombs, and talking about all the different ways that bombs can be put on airplanes, and talking about
you stayed.
Yes, and talking. Okay, and this is if there's one in the front of the aircraft, and on this kind of airplane, and the LRBL, which is
right,
least risk.
Least resistance. That's right.
So it's the area where you can put a bomb and the plane will still fly if it goes wrong, essentially. So where the LRBL is on the back end of the plane, and he says, okay, this is a it's in like a FedEx envelope, and it's got a pressure switch, and you got to take this back to the LRBL, build a bomb shelter essentially in the back of an airplane using luggage and wet blankets and women's socks and bras and belts and blah, 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 blah. And you've got to do this under intense stress. And I just raised my hand, and he goes, yes. I said, that sounds like a lot of MacGyver bullshit to me. And he goes, excuse me? I said, you're telling me that you want Matt Kubler to pick up a bomb and carry it past 180 people, all flipping the fuck out because there's a bomb. And then I have to have my partner go and build a bomb shelter while everybody's freaking the hell out. And then I got to go and ask politely for women to take off their bra and men to take off their belts and suspenders. And so I can seal this thing up so that if it does blow up, we can live. I'm just telling you, that's some serious MacGyver shit. I said, I got an idea. Why doesn't the airplane come with some sort of a cargo net that clips to the bottom and that I don't have to go around, take one of these steps out, and I have more success?
Not cost effective.
And that's how, when people are after law enforcement and targeting us imagine what the upper level of our government, the trickle down effect of how effed up that scenario I just said is, how that makes its way down to us, the little guy who's got to go out and do the job every day while they're legislating and coming up with policies and rules that make absolutely no sense, but we have to abide by them because we're just the little guy who's got to go out and be the soldier.
Yeah.
That's how screwed up our society is that we're not looking at how the problem got caused on both sides. How, if there's a problem with law enforcement on any level, it's not necessarily the cop that showed up's fault. There's a whole big, gigantic animal behind it. And then conversely, the person that's calling the police, the problem that we're dealing with right then and there is a byproduct of probably a very large, bigger problem that caused what happened today for me to be there. Sure. And both of them need to be fixed, but they can't be fixed in that very moment. Right. The only thing I can do is deal with the problem at hand. And then once that's solved, then we can have a conversation about how we got here.
Right. Part of the issue when it comes to politics with that, Matt, is like I mentioned to you before, giving the law enforcement the benefit of the doubt, or don't even give me the benefit of the doubt. Just take the time to understand what it is exactly, what I have to do in that scenario and what happens and the way I'm trained. But it doesn't fit their narrative. It doesn't fit their narrative because, again, like I told Grant Schmidt, they hate you. They freaking hate you. They hate me. They hate everything about it. In their mind, in their private, when they're with their friends and they're cracking open a bottle of wine, they talk crap about you. And then 15 minutes later, when they leave that person's house and their car blows a radiator hose on some shit road, and you're the one that pulls up, all of a sudden you're their savior. But they're not going to tell that story, Matt. They're gonna keep repeating because it's a mentality of need to be recognized and feel loved. And if I keep saying this crazy shit about law enforcement or about anything else, this narrative, people are I'm in that group. Well, I've never been one to fall to peer pressure. And a lot of people that do what we do are really good at looking at all, when people say there's two sides to every story, I let them have their say, and then I correct them and say, well, I've been there where there was 15 sides to the story. Mm-hmm. So it's just like when you get married and you're like, somebody will say, oh, you're getting married. Marriage is a 50-50 proposition. No, it's not. Ask Mrs. Byrne. Some days it's 99% on her and it was 1% on me. So you have to be open to those things. The bottom line is that most people that have this negative narrative about law enforcement, or they push it, they don't even have it, they push it. Because listen, again, I worked at the White House. I worked around the White House press pool and thousands of reporters. I saw them with their fake media back before we even called it fake news. And then I saw the way we reacted around law enforcement when they needed something. They hated the Secret Service Uniform Division when they had to come into the White House. And who are you to ask me what I have in my pockets? Or why do you need to see my past? You know who I am. I'm Wolf Blitzer.
Right.
Because that's what the procedures are, and you have to follow them. Otherwise, they're not procedures. So, but I also saw some of those same people when they got jammed up or they did something wrong. And they, hey, man, I'm always good to you. Hey, my brother's sister-in-law's aunt's mother is coming into town. Can you hook me up on a tour? Well, I'd say, you have to go through the press secretary. Oh, they never do the right thing for us. You guys are the best. Oh, I'm the best now because you need a tour. But
Right.
6 months ago, when I tried to stop you from doing something for 2 seconds while the protectee moved, I was destroying our constitutional republic. I was destroying freedom of speech. So I see things with a whole different, and you know this, you know me well. We talked till we're blue in the face. So anyway, I'll stop there. Go ahead.
And this one, for the record, everybody, I've never had a plan for any one of my shows, and Gary and I have already done a show before. So when we started this, I had no idea what the direction was we were going to go with our show today. I didn't know if we were going to talk about, current events, which, I still want to talk about
Sure. I'm ready when you are.
Debate when we get there. But I think this is an important topic because it is very much true to where we are today, where there's this lack of listening and a lack of communication and a lack of critical thinking in our country, because the media, whether you are right wing or left wing, whether you are a centrist, the media is driving the narrative. The media will pump into you. And I've talked about this many times before. If you send a police officer into a call and say a white suburban kid becomes a cop and he grew up in an area where there weren't a lot of Hispanics or blacks or Asians or whatever, and you send him into an environment where that predominantly is people that he's not familiar with, and he doesn't have any experience handling their culture or understanding things about them, and you give them 18 months of training and then send them into that environment and they have to somehow assimilate into that environment, that's when mistakes happen the most, is because you have somebody who's truly has no idea what they're doing and doesn't know how to communicate with a certain type of person based on their ethnic or cultural background. Miscommunication is the key to most problems. It's when marriages fall apart. It's when relationships fall apart. When you have problems with your children, that falls apart. Employers, it falls apart. It's all about miscommunication. And when you have miscommunication, then you have misperceptions. Then things start to become blown out of proportion. And in the world we're living in today, the media is pumping us with so much misinformation and miscommunication and misdirection that those that lack critical thinking can't seem to wrap their head around the actual truth and get sucked into the drama. It's almost like watching soap operas of what the media is pumping out there. Behind all of that is fact. And the fact is that police officers are not killing unarmed black people like it's an epidemic. I had a conversation with the same family. I went and talked to the kids, and I said, say you had $360 million and you lost $9. Would you burn the $360 million because you lost those $9? She goes, no. I said, well, there are 360 million contacts between law enforcement and the public in 2019, roughly. And 9 unarmed black people were killed by police. Out of 360 million potential interactions, 9 people died that were black. Not to mention the 20 some that were white and whatever the other demographics were. The reality is that 9. And within those 9, there's an individual story to each one of those.
Right.
And of those 9, how many of them were doing absolutely nothing wrong and they just happened to die by the cops? I don't know the number, but I'm going to say probably 0. Were some of them maybe mistakes in law enforcement where they used lethal force when they could have or should have not used lethal force? I don't know each one of their stories, but I can tell you probably so. But out of that, 1 is too many, but we're talking about 9 out of 360 million. And right now we're burning down cities because of 9. And this narrative of systemic racism in law enforcement and in our government. And I'm just saying that if you're looking at facts matter. The facts are that 9 people out of 360 million were shot as unarmed citizens that were of color. And we can't negate that fact. And I can't put the same level of credence and emphasis on a narrative that doesn't have the facts to support it. Do I believe every single black life in the world matters, past, present, and future? Absolutely. Without a doubt, I believe that. And that's unequivocally been my belief since I was a kid. I was a minority in my own high school. I grew up in a black neighborhood. I lived in projects. I understand the plight of the black person that grows up poor. and I had this conversation as well, and this, we're going off the rails, but whatever, we're here. If you add up every small, people talk about urban environment and how the government and the racism within, systemic racism within the government is what's keeping Black people from succeeding in the urban environments in inner cities. I would argue it's an economic bias, not a racial injustice, that there's inherently a plan by the government to keep people in different levels of fucked, right? We're all on some level of fucked. If you're not in the 1%, we're all fighting for decimal places on how more or less fucked we are compared to the other. And in urban environments, they make it difficult for you to get out and get a job because there's not many jobs in the environment you're living in. So you would say, if you don't have a car, you have to get on a bus, take the bus to go to your job. And sometimes the bus is late and sometimes you're going to be late for work, which is going to get you fired. And then that's going to make it hard for you to go out. So what do? They create social services that give you free stuff, welfare and all those other things that keep you there. But if you add, and that's horrible. It's horrible. And I think our government sucks for doing that. But if you go to every small town in America that once had an industry, whatever that industry might be, Pottstown, where I grew up, we had Bethlehem Steel, we had Doler Jarvis, which made parts for cars. Like, we had all these large industries and factories where people went to work that lived there. And people were getting income and raising their families, and they owned their home and they were doing great. And then all of a sudden, the government decided that either we're no longer using this thing that we're making, whether it's coal or whatever, and we shut down these industries, or we ship them out to overseas. Now, the same people that were just doing well are not doing well because they don't have a job now, but they still have bills, they still have a family, they still have a mortgage, and they needed to get work and they couldn't. So they put them on government assistance. And those people may be white, they may be not Black. And if you add up every one of those small towns in America, it's going to 100 times the number of people in that environment in the city. And the point is that we're all fighting for our own slice of getting out of this place we're in. We're all in it. I'm in it. You're in it. I'm not wealthy.
Right.
I'm a single income in my family.
Yeah.
I have a good job. I have a safe job. I have a job that, there's never not going to be crime. But the reality is we're all fighting for our slice of the American dream. And some of us will work harder to get there than others. And some will accept the fact that they're in this place and the government's giving them stuff. I'll give you an example. My buddy's a dentist. And this is just a slice from what's happening today. And it's not even about the socioeconomic component. It's just about how do we create lazy people. He is a dentist. He couldn't open up his dental practice when he was allowed to because his employees wouldn't come back to work because they were making more money on the free government dollar than they were when they were on salary with him. So they were waiting until that stopped before they would come back to work. That's just a small little slice of where we are as a country, and how easily within 6 weeks we can go from being a free constitutional republic to a confined, imprisoned country, wearing masks and afraid of talking to another human being and interacting, and then getting free shit to keep us at home, which I've never had. I didn't get any of that free money. I had to go to work every day. But those that did, now they don't want to go back to work because they're okay with the fact that they don't have to do anything and get a paycheck.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And one of the things I just want to add to that, and then you can take us any direction you want, is that's the issue with what you're describing there is big government. We've let these governments get too big, the federal government all the way down the chain. I'm not saying that people don't need help at certain times.
Absolutely.
But
I was on welfare. My mom was on welfare, but I was a welfare kid, but we got off of it. She got a job and got off of it.
Yeah, you and I know from being government employees, one of the biggest problems with the federal government is it's not what they do so much as it's how they do it. The Federal Air Marshal Service has, for every 25 federal air marshals it has, there's 9 people in the chain of command. It's ridiculous. They're so top heavy management. They're flipping a Christmas tree upside down. You could take the best company in the world, your favorite old company, IBM, Coca-Cola, a new company, Tesla, whoever, and they would be out of business in 50. They wouldn't even, some of these modern day company CEOs would not even They would laugh in your face if you told them to set up the system like the government has it. You know, one level of bureaucracy after another, and then every once in a while you get this new politician that comes in that has the best idea to fix it. And what does he do? He adds another level, and that's not what makes it work. You have to less. You know, when we talk, all these, we just did it, and everybody does it. Communications is important. Is it easier for you and I to communicate like this, or is it easier for there to be the 7 people between us? And I tell the first person what it is I want, or the question, and then, you know, we all played this game when I was a kid. By the time the question gets to you, the question may be, Matt, what did you have for breakfast? By the time you get the question, Matt, Gary said you're fat. You know what I mean? Like, so that's one of the things, but it's easily lost in because we let that, it's easy, that point is easily lost. Smaller is always better. Smaller is always better. It's always easy to maintain things that function small. And then that causes you to have to draw less tax money, because I know you know this, but I'm going to say this for anybody that's listening that doesn't understand. If it's not on the tip of your tongue, it needs to be. There is no such thing as government money. There's not.
It doesn't make any.
Government doesn't make crap,
right,
other than regulation and burdensome rules. What the government does do is and some people say it's illegal, call it whatever you want. They take money from you in the form of taxes. And how much will they take? They'll let you know. Because I'm telling you right now, I cannot believe that right now, part of this discussion about the next president of the United States is one of the people running, and then their mentality is that I'm going to tax you more and you're going to be better for it. It's like saying that if I punch you in the face once a day, that if I punch you in the face twice, you'll be better for it. It's not. It doesn't work that way. Taxing is punitive, and governments rarely point out a government agency or function that's not full of fraud, waste, and abuse. They actually have an organization in the government called Fraud, Waste, and Abuse, and itself is full of fraud, waste, and abuse. So anyway, all right.
Government, listen, the reason I got out of federal service, I left my law enforcement job, local law enforcement, to go become an air marshal after 9/11 because of my burning desire to protect America and do something proactive.
Yes.
But when I got in there and I saw how utterly wasteful and bloated the system is, and how the things that they wanted me to do, but they wouldn't do themselves because they were supervisors, or they were double dipping. And they were double dipping, half of them, all the supervisors, retiring from the Secret Service pension, and collecting their pension, and then getting a $150,000 salary as a supervisor within the Federal Air Marshal Service.
Because so that's the way we've always done it, Matt.
Right, and that to me is nonsense. The fact that there were so many people in charge of so many people, that it was the numbers just didn't fit. And it's like, where I grew up in Pottstown School District has been underfunded dramatically for a long time. $13 million underfunded annually, and which is horrible. And that's a whole different conversation. But one of the things I look at is how, as a former business owner, how do I get rid of some of the costs that I don't need, right? How do I help my business be a little bit more closer to fruitful if I take away some wasteful spending? And Pottstown's got, it's a small school district. The borough of Pottstown is a transient town. They don't have a lot of people living there. It's a lot of renters, a lot of people that come and go. When I graduated, we had 210 people in my class. If there's 800 people, 750 kids in the high school, that's a lot right now. And there's 4 principals in the high school. Each class has a principal. And I'm like, well, when I went to high school, we had 1 principal, we had a vice principal. That's it. But now there's all these other new high-level organization leadership positions within a small school district, and that's at all the different schools. And I'm like, well, if you just took away all the extra principal salaries, you'd be at over $1 million.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you save that $1 million? Because they don't need to function. The reality is you're not supervising that many kids to where you can't manage it. And those are the things that I look at. And it's just like the government. I mean, it's the state government, the Department of Education rules the day within local public schools. So they're allowing this to happen within their own district. And to me, that's just a microcosm where we are in the world and in our government, that we allow all this extra spending and all this wasteful spending and wasteful stuff. That's why we're in these deficits. And that's why they're taxing the shit out of us in order to help continue to pay for all that wasteful spending. And by the way, the check you're getting as you're sitting on your ass at home during a pandemic and not working, and then not going back to work because you're still getting that check, that's not money that you're getting for free. That's someone else's tax dollar that helped fund that payment to you.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right.
All right, let's transition.
Okay.
All right. And we'll end on this because I think it'll be a high note. So we'll end on it. Last night, what I watched, and I was at a buddy's house, and he has a really cool setup, and it was like a pavilion kind of thing with a big screen TV, and I had a couple of TVs. Right. I've never seen anything quite like that on live television between two people who are supposedly leaders of the, potential leaders of the free world. One is, and one wants to be, and was the number 2 guy in charge at one point in time under Obama. What I witnessed was it was magical in a weird, twisted kind of sort of way.
Yes.
Because it's so different from everything that you would expect from a presidential debate. But it was such a train wreck. It was like watching, and I never saw an episode of it, but like Tiger King or something. Like, it was just, you're like, what in the hell? What were your thoughts about the debate last night?
So what you saw there was kind of an example of what debate prep looks like. Because I've seen debate prep. I've seen presidents prep for debate, and they basically had people come in and attack them. And the problem with last night, the way I see it, and I'm not going to, anybody that knows me knows that I'm pro-Trump. And listen, he's not a politician. He's not perfect. I have no problem with the way he behaved last night, other than I just wish he would, if he had said a little bit less, Biden would have had more time to say stupid shit and show everybody who he really is. But setting that aside, it's the first debate out of 3, debates out of 4, excuse me. It's the first one out of 4. There's 3 more left. So what you saw there is, and this is the way I frame it up. This is, Donald Trump is a guy who was a very successful businessman. And the problem is he doesn't fit the mainstream media mainstream media narrative. And President Trump wasn't really debating Joe Biden. Right. He was really debating Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and he was debating Chris Wallace. Yep. And if somebody doesn't see some of the bias in Chris Wallace's, and I get Chris is human, we just talked about this, and I get he's under a lot of pressure, but if you follow Chris Wallace, and I know he's on Fox, but if you follow Chris Wallace, he does an excellent job of carrying the mainstream media narrative in a way that a lot of people cut him a break for. He's not MSNBC, but I got to tell you, he ain't factual all the time either. He's not completely honest. But what I saw yesterday, it doesn't surprise me. I'm fine with it. I'm not embarrassed for the president. I'm not embarrassed for anybody. I think it's what a good portion of America wants to see. They want to see, listen, there's nobody on this planet that's ever had a job or whatever who hasn't, or, in school where you've been bullied by somebody and what they're doing is wrong. Listen, if Joe Biden had anything to offer the country, where has it been in 47 years? And again, I'm not saying Trump is perfect, but if you look at really what he's done, the reform in some of the DOJ stuff, the peace talks, Chris Wallace had no question about Middle East peace.
And that to me is mind-numbing to think.
Well, it proves my point, and I shouldn't say it proves my point. It's just common sense. That's not what he wants because it doesn't fit the narrative. If that was a Democrat that had done what President Trump had done, it would be all over. They'd be making lunch boxes with it, and T-shirts.
Yep.
I know this because I watched with Clinton, and his stuff failed, and they still made it look like. And that's not a slight against the Clintons. They tried. But Middle East peace is a tough deal. But here's the thing. I believe by the time this debate's over, it'll be clear that Joe Biden really does have a problem. They are propping him up. I know this for a fact that it's not, I mean, I believe it. I know enough about the whole, you got to realize, I watched this process from the perspective of the Secret Service, where I literally watch these people almost get dressed and prepare for this stuff. Now, President Trump needs no help other than, he needs no help. I'm not going to criticize him. Biden is clearly, in the last couple of years, has declined mentally. Call it whatever you want. But here's the thing. Joe Biden was a functioning retard to start with. And anybody who's offended by that, here's why I say it. You've never seen what I saw. I know who the real Joe Biden is. I worked in the Clinton White House. I protected him for 8 years. I worked outside I saw Joe Biden there when he was just regular Joe Biden. And the reason they used to call him Uncle Joe is because, listen, when the people that you supposedly call your friends in the Senate that you've been working with for 25 years are at a family function and they steer their children away from Joe Biden because they know why he's called Uncle Joe, that's all you need to know.
Right.
If you can't, just like I said, when the accusations came out about Bill Clinton and Juanita Broderick, she accused him of rape. If you can't believe her story enough to say, if any woman in the world, just about, or in this country, brought that same story to a police department, they'd open an investigation. And the same with Tara Reade's story. And when it happened, I know it was real because these security people would come from the Capitol to the White House. We would talk. And literally, there was a group of congressmen and senators that the employees, both men and women, used to tell the women that would come to work there, these men, and I'll name some of them because their persona is such where you know it's true, or you can at least, and in some cases they're dead, and I don't give a crap either way. But Ted Kennedy, Joe Biden, Bill Clinton. Somebody says to me, Gary, what's Bill Clinton really like? I'd say he's a funny guy. You might want to have a beer with him. You don't let him drive your 27-year-old niece home.
Right.
Joe Biden has no redeeming. Listen, the only reason Barack Obama picked him because he was so incompetent and he knew he could do whatever he wanted. And I don't know if he had this Spygate scheme and from the very beginning, but it's what they ended up doing with the help of the Clintons or vice versa. And he is complicit because he doesn't have a clue what goes on.
Right.
And again, name one thing that he's done. You know, when you ask a Democrat what has he done, they'll say, well, he was very responsible for the no gun zones in schools. Well, that's not something to be proud of, because no gun zones are just basically slaughter zones. You're just telling criminals and pathological nuts that that more than likely there'll be nobody there with a gun to fight them.
Right.
You know, that's who the real Joe Biden is. He's never done anything productive other than, and you can't ignore what goes on with his family. I mean, how is it? This is the question you have to ask about politics. How is it that 4 members of the Senate, Pelosi, Biden, Mitt Romney, and I forget who the 4th one is, how is it they have sons working for the same Ukrainian oil company?
Yep.
How is that possible? How come Matt Kubler's not on that board? How come Joe Schmo, who worked for Chevron in California for 20 years, is, you know what I mean? That's a clue. That's smoke. You know what I mean? So listen, all politics has some corruption to it. But if you don't think President Trump is the least corrupt person you're ever going to have in politics, then you're not an honest person.
I agree. And I think the reality is that when you look at again, critical thinking, right? As a cop, we're always looking at every different angle, looking at probable. I always say I work under, is it probable or plausible? Plausible is just something I'll give it a cursory look.
Right.
And not really, it doesn't hold enough weight. Probable makes me go, I'm going to dig into this a little bit more. And it's probable that the names that you just mentioned are corrupt. And it's probable that they've spent their entire life in government, working for the government in elected office, because they're corrupt. And they allow things to happen so that big businesses and big pharma and all these other places can make money off of their ability to legislate in their favor. That's how this whole thing works. That's why there are PACs. That's why there are, they have lobbyists on Capitol Hill. Those people are lobbying for their corporate partner and lobbying to have some congresswoman, man, senator to do things for them so that they benefit. And it's a system that was created. It's not, that's not illegal. They're allowed to do that.
Right.
But then there's the extracurriculars that come off of that, like having your son work for Burisma. Like, that's how this whole thing works. How do you get $3.5 million from the ex-wife of the mayor of Moscow? Why would somebody give you $3.5 million?
Well, no, okay, fine. Why didn't she give it to you?
Right.
Why, if she's just giving away money? Because it's the same reason that all these foreign governments gave all this money to the Clinton Foundation in the run up to 2016, because they were sure Hillary Clinton was going to be president. They were buying favors. They were buying a positive reaction to interaction with the Clinton, what they thought was going to be the Clinton administration. And a perfect example of it is the Uranium One deal. In all of history, in any country in the world, nobody has voluntarily given 20% of their uranium reserves to a foreign country who's considered one of their enemies.
Right.
We haven't given Israel 20% of our reserves. Or you know what I mean? We haven't given UK. But the Clinton, the Clinton State Department under Barack Obama gave it to Vladimir Putin. And then they turn around and they do what they always do, is to take the light, because they know the mainstream media is going to push whatever they say, no matter how bizarre it is. They spin this thing around. They have this Spygate thing that makes it look like Trump was doing, actually, they try to make it look like Trump was doing actually what they were doing.
Right.
And again, I go back to, Gary, how can you say this? I go back to my first book, Price as a Character. When they realized that, before they realized that there was DNA on Monica Lewinsky's dress, they were trying to make it look like 2 uniform division officers, myself and somebody else, were the reason Lewinsky was coming to the West Wing. It wasn't to see Bill Clinton, because they knew eventually Lewinsky would say, oh, okay, their story's right, because they knew how infatuated she was and how crazy she was, or how crazy she acted anyway. So again, it's the same thing, just change what it's about. It's the same mentality. Oh, I didn't have Bill Clinton didn't have an affair. And then when they figure out that they did, well, I admit that having caused pain in my relationship. And then part of his administration saying, well, come on, everybody has affairs. A lot of people do. That's not, a lot of people don't. Right. A lot of people don't. And it's not the norm. And if you're going to behave like that, fine, but don't try to, don't try to sell me a pile of poop and tell me it's steak. So
I don't claim to be right about everything. I don't claim to be the most justified in everything that I do. I am, no one's going to outwork me in my quest for information.
Right.
I'm a dogged investigator when it comes to, if I see something on TV, or I see, when I was on Facebook, somebody would post something, I can't believe X, Y, and Z happened, and it's in a meme, and I'm like, all right, well, I don't know if that's factual or not, but I mean, if it is, that's crazy, or that's awesome. But so I find out whether or not it's true, or do my best at least to do that by looking at multiple different sources of information in order to figure out whether or not something is actually what they're saying it is. And where I think we are as a society, and I think it's just years of force feeding people information and making it easier for us to get information, that we take the first thing that we get. Human beings are inherently going to find the easy way out.
Yeah.
We always will.
Hey, Matt, can we take a break for a second?
Yep.
Thanks. I'll be right back.
No problem.
I agree with everything you said. It's a little different for me because the things I talk about, I do a lot of research and everything, but there's a simple procedure to understanding when you hear a story about politics, and it goes back to, and this is kind of the bread and butter of law enforcement, the military, human behavior. is the best way to predict future behavior is to look at past behavior.
Mhm.
They teach it in every law enforcement intelligence academy in the world in every language you can imagine. So,
I agree.
and here's a modern example I'm going to give your audience. So right now there's a story going around, crazy story. Matt, it can't possibly be true, that during Joe Biden's time as vice president at a Christmas party, that he got in an altercation with his Secret Service agent because Joe Biden was groping this guy's girlfriend. Now that can't be true, can it, Matt?
No,
Right.
because he's never done that before.
Right. Because there's not hours of video of him sniffing young girls' hairs, grabbing adult women from behind. Tara Reid, that's not real. So when this did happen, I was still in the Secret Service, I was still in the Air Marshals. I think you had probably transitioned to your department by then. I forget exactly. I want to say it was 2009 or 11, somewhere around there. Anyway, so I come into work one day and I won't use his real name, but Buckethead,
Oh, yeah.
Buckethead,
Yep.
was walking up and down with his big flat feet, oh, did you hear this? Hey, Garrett, did you hear what happened at the house, man, at the VPR? VPR stands for Vice President Residence. I'm like, no, what happened? He goes, oh, the Christmas party. And he tells me the story. And here's what happened. So every first family, second family, president, vice president, on the Christmas holiday season, they have a Christmas party traditionally for the Secret Service agents, the protection detail, just the agents. Sometimes they invite some of the senior military people that are involved. This party took place at the vice president's residence, just like one takes place at the White House. And through the years, sometimes the uniform division people get invited there, but the vice president's residence detail is pretty small. So a lot of times they invite the uniform division guys or they give them a separate party. But anyway, so they're there. And I heard the story from two different people. When I heard it from John, excuse me, I just gave the first name away. But anyway, I heard it from Buckethead. And a couple of days later, when I had the opportunity, I called a friend of mine who was in the know. And when I brought it up, he couldn't stop laughing. And so they're at the party, and this agent is introducing his girlfriend to the vice president and different people. And all of a sudden, Joe Biden and everybody who protects him has seen this. And if you've been around him, he just kind of his eyes roll back, and he just all of a sudden it's that pathological, shows you that he really has an issue. And he grabs her and from like behind, and he's kind of groping her breast, and he moves around the side. And of course, the agent sees this, the look on the woman's face. And I'm going to tell this from two perspectives. I'm going to tell you from the perspective of what Buckethead told me. And then I'm going to tell you from the perspective of another agent who was there on the other side of the room. So he sees the agent whose girlfriend it is, sees this, and he pushes the vice president's hands away. And Joe Biden, again, pathological, goes back, because here's where the arrogance and a lifetime of being a senator and never being told no, and never being told his behavior is bad by anybody or being held accountable. He goes and he keeps doing it, and he's like pissed at the guy. And so the guy slaps his hands away, and like it got physical. So from the other perspective, this other agent's on the other side of the room. He's talking to his lovely wife. She's got a new dress on. They have drinks. They're eating great appetizers. And all of a sudden, the other agent says to his wife, "Hold my drink." And he starts to cross the room, and she's seen this 100 times. She's seen it because he's a Secret Service agent on the job. She's seen it with their kids at home. There's something wrong. Mm-hmm. She can tell by his demeanor. And she looks over to where he's headed to, and she sees Joe Biden with this weird look on his face doing what I just described to you. This guy saw the thing in his mind, Biden's mind, that triggers him, and he's seen it before, and he knew to try to intervene. And by the time he crossed the room, it was happening in front of him. So again, what do we know about his past behavior? That is the way he acts. There's something wrong with him. It's always been ignored. He's Uncle Joe. The proof is out there. The problem is that the mainstream media doesn't care because it doesn't affect them.
Right.
They don't care. They're going to push the narrative forward that after 47 years and a lifetime of pretty much incompetency and certainly a lot of corruption in his last 8 years as vice president, that again, obvious, look at the behavior. How do these four young men whose parents are senators end up there? How does all this money, why are they paying them all this money when they don't have any expertise? Yep. It's a clue. It's a little smoke. It should be looked at. So that's a process that I use everywhere. I apply it to everything, and I learned it the hard way.
Yeah.
You know, and here's another clue to that story. Do you know who Judicial Watch is?
Yep.
So the Secret Service releases a statement that they don't comment on issues like that. The Biden campaign denies that it ever happened. Judicial Watch files a release of files of what's it called?
FOIA, yeah.
FOIA.
Information Act, yep.
FOIA request. The Secret Service does not answer with, it doesn't exist. They give them something that's so redacted. In other words, there's a paper trail of this guy being reprimanded for defending his girlfriend. So,
which means it actually happened.
If that is, no, it's all made up, Matt.
Right.
No, the Secret Service is playing 5 sides of the story. Of course, it happened because the guy was reprimanded. And listen, the people I worked with, you know, this guy Buckethead. You have to tell, you know, it's just like when you and I were flying, and I could see you in the airport, and you're getting on a plane, and I'd say, "Oh, I recognize that flight attendant,"
right?
And I could say, and you'd say to me, "What's she like?" And I could say, "She's great, Matt. She'll treat you like she's known you your whole life." Or I'd say, "Matt, make sure you buy a bottle of water before you get on the plane because she's not even going to look your way."
Right.
You know. It's the same thing in the Secret Service. You have to tell your coworkers what's going on when they relieve you. And what's, you know, I had to tell these guys that I worked outside the Oval Office. They had to tell me he's been in there for an hour and a half on a Sunday with nobody else there with this certain woman, whether it was Lewinsky or somebody else. And 5 phone calls have come in and he hasn't taken any of them. You know, 5 phone calls from around the world that the president of the United States should be fielding. But
right.
Anyway, so that's what reality is. That's how I see it differently than most people. And that's how I know those things are true. I can usually, and I'll tell you who else is good at this. I give him a plug, is Dan Bongino, because he's seen a lot of the stuff that I've seen, and he can lay it out for you just like that. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, brother, I could do this all day long. We're going to do it again, I'm sure.
Sure. Anytime. You know how I feel about it. If it helps you, let me do it for you.
And I truly do appreciate that.
No problem. No problem. And I'm grateful to talk to you, to get the story out, and to see that you've done so well. And what happened with you with your little foray into politics. Don't let that discourage you. It is a dirty business, Matt. You know that.
Oh yeah.
And the other side, no matter who you are in politics, if you're a good person trying to do good things, there's 1,000 people out there that are trying to make you. I always say, if Mother Teresa ran for office as a Republican, that 2 weeks after she announced she was running, that the Democrats would have her pictures of her on a brass pole with a heroin needle in her arm, doing whatever. That's just the way they are, because good and honest and supporting our constitutional republic is not their narrative.
Well, one thing I took out of my experience, and we'll end on this note, as running for office, and I consider myself a very good strategic and tactical thinker.
Sure, you have to be, right.
An actor. I do things pretty well, and I could see their moves coming.
Yeah.
And I created this hashtag chess not checkers,
right.
because I was playing chess. The one thing that I learned from this is that, or that I take from it as a valuable thing that I will take with me forever, is that I exposed the left for being exactly who everybody says they are, but I actually had them do it to me.
Right. At
Like,
your level. That's
yeah,
the important thing.
right.
We know about it up here.
Yeah, I'm a write-in candidate. I wasn't even the candidate. I was a fucking write-in.
Right. You can't run for an office at a more basic human neighborhood level.
Yep.
I mean, other than, I don't know, the head of the homeowners association.
And even that's political.
That's
My buddy's on that. That's
right. So yeah. So what you've done, again, what you just kind of, and this isn't about me proving my point, but you just filled in for your listeners a very good point. I've told them about past behavior predicting future behavior. You just proved it to them. Because what I saw the Clintons do back then and many times since then, doing right now, Obama doing, the left in general, they did it to you. So you make the connection from here to here.
Yep.
From the head of the federal government all the way down to good old Matt Kubler trying to do the right thing for his neighbors. And they will crap on you and tell you that it's hamburger. That's just the way it, or ice cream or whatever. So you've filled in the filled in the information. You know, it's not whether people believe it or not, it's what the facts are. And there's plenty of information out there on both ends of that spectrum to prove it. Behave as you will and live your life as you will. But remember, at some point in your life, you're going to be judged. You know, there's certain things you don't want to have to explain.
Yeah, I'm thankful that I experienced it, because it validated to people, because I built a really good following of people who were supporting me, and for them to see, even though they in their mind they may have, you hear about all the stuff at the higher levels of government, the dirtiness and all that, but to actually witness it happen to somebody who literally was just a write-in candidate. Now, granted, I was making a lot of noise. I had a lot of people paying attention to me, but I was the write-in candidate.
Yeah.
To see that attack happen to somebody, and it happened actually after I stepped down and allowed and gave my support to the Republican candidate, that they actually came at me harder because I was exposing things about the Democratic candidate that they didn't want me exposing. So when you see the desperation, and that worry in the other side, and how they would use anything to shut me up. This isn't about may the best man win. This is about how do we keep people quiet so that we can continue to move forward with our agenda. And that's what I learned. And
they want to keep that narrative going, their narrative, which is, regardless of whatever level it's at, is a form of socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it. It's control. It's control. If you don't believe me, tell me about the day you locked the doors to your gym.
Yep.
Or, you know, not you personally, but, you know, or any business. Go to that favorite mom and pop hoagie shop where you lived and see that sign on the door. And that poor guy that's owned that building been in his family for 40 years has got it up for sale because the governor of Pennsylvania or whatever state you're in is a totalitarian jackass, and he's keeping the economy shut down for political reasons.
Yep.
Listen, I get COVID-19 as a disease, but so is regular influenza. So is VD. So is the swine flu that we all kept flying back and forth all over the world with. And our office gave us hand sanitizer. So, you know, it's not that I'm skeptical, and it's not that I don't care about life. I value all life, regardless of where you came from, what you look like. I value it all. But I'm a realist, and I understand that this is not, that this COVID thing stopped being about disease and health at the end of March.
Yep. Agreed.
I'm sorry. And, you know, if you want to run around with a mask on, listen, when I go into the store because they're required, I do it. I'm not, that will not be my last stand. You know? So I'll wear the mask, but I know it's probably not doing anything. But if it's making somebody feel comfortable, you know, whatever. And so, you know, I don't want to get wrapped around the axle on that, but that's part of this is they use fear. They want to steer the narrative to keep pushing that they're the anointed ones. They know what's best. You know what the truth is because you know who you are and the people around you do. So that's the way you need to look at politics. What's their past behavior? You know, why are these accusations out there about Joe Biden's behavior around women and young girls? Well, look at the videotape.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you having me on.
Dude, it was a blast.
I'm there for you, buddy. And
I'm gonna close out the show. Hang tight. We'll talk after.
Yeah, sounds great. Bye-bye.
Everybody, thank you for watching and listening to another episode of the Two Dates in a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kubler. It has been a while. Started off a little slow for me, just getting my bearings again, but we got into it pretty quickly. And Gary is a fountain of knowledge. He's a brother of mine. I appreciate his insight and his experiences and his ability to share them publicly and without fear. And for me, that's the way I live my life. I try to live it without any fear or any regrets, because everything I do, I try to do intentionally. And I want people to understand that living your life does not mean you have to always follow and conform to the rules. You sort of have to figure out what your barometer is and where you want to live your life, and don't always expect other people to help you get there. Figure out life on your own and live it to the best of your ability, and live it honestly and intentionally. So thank you again, everybody. God bless. Take care and go out and be kind to one another.